Happy Monday. Happy February. Happy Family Day, Steph. How are you? Happy President's Day, everybody.
I'm good. How are you?
It's just a happy day.
It's happy for everybody except the people in the one area of Wisconsin where that factory blew up.
I don't have the news on. Did a factory blow up in Wisconsin?
It was like a cheese factory. Like it got totally leveled. All that was left was debris.
Debris. I'm not going to follow that. That's my joke is not anywhere near as close. I'm just going to skip my joke. Steph, do you know what we're talking about today?
I do.
We're talking about
weirdly
setting prices, which I think it sounds pretty easy, but it's not that simple. What if the price you're charging is teaching your customers your product isn't worth that much? Clio, the legal practice management platform, nearly collapsed in 2008 when they priced like every other startup, low, hoping volume would save them. The founder, Jack Newman, reversed course, raised prices 40%, discovered higher paying clients churned less because they invested enough to actually use the product. Today on How to Founder, we'll be talking about setting pricing and pricing strategy and market analysis. I am your host, and with me is my wonderful and sarcastically funny co-host, Stephanie. What else can I say, Steph?
That's all you got?
That's all I got. I said you were funny and sarcastic. You want more?
What about all the other things?
And with us today is I'm gonna get this right, Dan Balcauski, who runs Product Tranquility, where he helps B2B SaaS companies stop treating pricing like a one-time guess. He's also a Kellogg program leader, teaching executives why your company's KPIs are not a strategy. Dan, welcome to the show. I must be a nerd, but I'm really looking forward to talking about pricing. I'm actually in a pricing conundrum right now, so hopefully I will learn something. Nice to have you on, Dan.
Thanks for having me. Well, I'm a self-proclaimed nerd too, so no shyness whatsoever about that. And look, if you want to have a live exorcism about your current pricing conundrum, we could do that too.
I'm not ready to go public with it yet, so maybe in another week and a half.
A friend has this problem and is really interested in it.
A friend has this problem. So, all right, let's talk about this. Let's just Steph, you may need to take over for me because I'm coughing like crazy. So founders look at take pricing and they look at competitors and pick a number that feels safe, or we're going to be a little bit more premium, or we're going to be a little bit less expensive. So they look externally. Does that work?
What a broad question. It really depends upon what part of the life cycle of your company you're at. So if you're super early stage, something that doesn't get talked about a lot is price positioning, right? When Southwest Airlines, for example, was coming out as an airline, they were making an explicit decision of, hey, yeah, we need to be compared against other airlines, but we also want to be compared. They've launched primarily in Texas against that business person who's thinking about driving their own car or taking a bus or a train between Houston and Dallas and have that be cost competitive. Or, in the world of wristwatches, are you trying to be Timex or Rolex? That's a decision you make early on that's going to have an impact throughout the rest of your business, right? Your go-to-market sales motion, if you're selling 600,000 to 7-figure deals, can support a outside sales force that's flying around to customer locations and wine and dining them. If you're selling a $100 per seat per year prosumer product, your go-to-market can't support that kind of outside sales staff. So you need to make that type of decision up front very early.
So you're saying your pricing has to take in consideration the cost of sales. Next, you're going to tell me something crazy like it also has to take in consideration the cost of the thing that you're selling.
It does, although software has got to exist in this weird state, completely unique from every other market until AI, which we could talk about as well. But they haven't really had to consider the cost of goods sold. But that doesn't work if you're selling anything. Yeah, every Shark Tank participant that's trying to sell a sponge or a new hummus dip or vegetarian
Post-it notes.
meat,
Yeah.
right? Post-it note. They all get asked the same question: what's your price landed to get this into the retail store? What do you sell at wholesale? No software exec has ever had to answer that question because it's been marginally close to zero. But now we're in this world of AI, so those software founders need to understand that question a little bit sooner than maybe they otherwise would have as well.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot closer. SaaS is going to be a lot more. Is going to be priced based on the cost of the metal than it has ever in the past, right?
There have been situations before, like anyone who's ever needed to integrate what like Twilio provided, text messaging. If you've ever looked at those providers, oftentimes they're doing pass-through costs because text message costs have this weird volume plus regional dependency that they've been trying to pass through. So it's existed in places in the SaaS world before. Oftentimes, a lot of software companies have had professional services, and those services have real like billable human hours behind them. So it's not altogether new, but I don't think everyone in the industry has been faced with this all at once in such a way as they are with AI right now.
Well, it's fun. It's also funny that you mentioned. So taking a step back, Rolex's cost of goods is it connected to the price of their watch? Is it?
It is. It is. Look, for any pricing exercise, you have generally 4 inputs that you need to consider. It's your costs, your competitive prices or alternatives, your customer willingness to pay, and the customer value that they get. And so for software, mostly they've got to ignore their costs. But everyone else, you have to consider your costs, right? I mean, there's definitely a higher cost of goods sold component for a Rolex. I'm assuming. I haven't actually looked at their financials. I don't even know if they're a public company.
Well, luxury brands in general have as high as 90% gross margins.
So they're like a SaaS business.
So they're like a SaaS business, right?
So they have different considerations, right? So, one of theirs is they can't be too prolific. You are not necessarily trying to maximize volume if you're Gucci or Burberry or Rolex. The fact that you are exclusive, the fact that there's a waiting list for a Lamborghini or any of these things, that might take 5 years before you actually get yours is part of the actual appeal. So you're optimizing for very different things. But I doubt most of your listeners are deciding to start, luxury
brands. Yeah, probably not. But there is. You said something earlier, which is you have to kind of decide. Are you a price brand, a value brand, or are you a premium brand? You have to kind of decide that out the gate, or do you?
You definitely should make it a conscious choice. Now, whether that, what you start out early, all of your framing of your positioning, the value you bring could all be, I would say, preferably stated as a hypothesis where you're going to learn and tune that over time. So you should have a conscious hypothesis of who you're trying to be and who you're trying to serve and why that matters to that person. But you're going to learn once you get out the gate. And you should be, like the scientific method, be open to getting real data on that hypothesis and learning if you're completely off center.
Steph, what are your thoughts?
So one of the things I always say to my clients is your pricing is there to support your brand, right? It's there to cause the right people to do the right things and the wrong people to do nothing. And so I think pricing is far more a psychological exercise than it is tied to cost of goods. Now, it totally depends on the business, of course, right? If you are in a high volume, low margin, volume scenario, then your pricing a little bit different and you have a commodity product and it's, it's got to fit into the market. But for a lot of founders, a lot of startups, we can talk about SaaS. It's a slightly different model because you've also got this, AppSumo type pricing model when you're first starting out that you can take advantage of as well. But I think the price that you charge and the price that you're going to get is so dependent on how you position what you're selling, right? So if I want to position myself as a luxury brand, but I charge dollar store prices, I'm not going to get the right clients, right? Like my clients who I want to work with are going to look at it and say, there's something wrong with that, right? Like that's not where I expect to pay. And so it all comes down to your positioning, your messaging, and what you're trying to actually sell, not the product.
I agree. One way I would maybe just rephrase that slightly is that your pricing and packaging is a function of your positioning. So you need to understand your positioning first, and then your pricing and packaging flow from there. Oh, Anthony, I think you're muted.
I knew that. To turn it off, I muted so I didn't cough, and then you can't hear me, which is probably a better podcast if you can't hear me. Is it true no matter what you set your price at, you're always going to have customers complaining about it's too expensive?
That's a great question. So I would say there's maybe one thing we elided over at the beginning of this, which is, one of the, I think, big mistakes, especially with SaaS pricing, is that most executives think that what you charge, in fact, who and how you charge, actually is more important than the price point. What that implies is that you often have multiple price points. We see this all the time outside the software world, right? Where I have business class seats versus economy seats, right? I have two different products I'm selling at two different price points. Even there's time-based differentiation. There was that old rule of thumb. You should always buy your airline tickets on a Tuesday, 6 to 8 weeks in advance, right? Because you knew that they're probably going to be more expensive the closer you got to to leaving. And so we see that a lot. So there's often more than, one price point that we're trying to manage. And we see that in B2B software all the time with, for example, tiers. Most B2B SaaS products have good, better, best choice architecture, right? Where you get a certain set of features at, one price point, another set of features at a, slightly increased price point, and, the all-in-one or maybe enterprise call us at an additional one. And then you also have an element of scaling for each of those, which call price metrics. So if you charge per seat or per size, number of accounts in your marketing database. So that allows us to properly size our offer and how much we're charging based upon, if we've done that well, based upon how much value a certain customer's getting. I'll go back to your original question. No matter what we charge, we're always going to have customers complaining. I think if you don't have anyone complaining, you've got a problem. It probably means you charge too low.
If you have no pushback on price, you're not charging enough.
Well, everyone's had different scenarios. It's called different things. Sometimes it's called the winner's curse. But a negotiation, if you put out an offer and someone says, "Give me the paperwork today, I'm going to sign it," you're like, "Oh crap!" Like I was way under what I could have gotten away with there. So you do want to have some pushback. Probably otherwise it's a signal that you're charged too low. But we also want to think about how do different customers get different value, and then how can we put those things like offer configurations together or scaling price metrics such that we're able to charge different price points to different levels of value. We don't see that as much in the B2C. That's definitely where the B2B case gets a little bit more complex, and we have a little bit more flexibility there.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to talk about one of the things that I find really annoying when it comes to, like, I imagine there's a lot of our listeners that are SaaS based or web-based. They have web-based pricing. And I always look at when a SaaS company doesn't put their pricing on their website, they're probably too expensive for me in the first place. But I know they do that strategically. So can you talk about a little bit about not just what you price it, and you said how you price, but if you publicly price?
It's a good question. I would say the vast majority, it's been a while since I've looked at these numbers, but somewhere in the range of like 50 to 70% of SaaS companies have public pricing. There's reasons you should and shouldn't. I have worked with companies before where their pricing and packaging is so complex. Like when we start an engagement, they send me a 60-page PDF of their price book. And it's like, well, yeah, we could put this online. No one would understand it, and it wouldn't help anything because it's so complex.
What kind of business? You don't have to be, but what kind of business has a 60-page pricing book?
Usually a mature one that's grown over time. And usually a company that is selling deep into enterprise, where you've created a lot of customization options. You have a lot of different SKUs. You have multiple products across the portfolio, each of them with multiple add-ons, configuration options, sizing. And so it's not super common, but these are the folks who are like, yeah, it doesn't make any sense to have public pricing and packaging. So let me give you some bad reasons not to put it out there. We're afraid our pricing is too high or low. Our competitors will get easy access to our pricing information. Our pricing doesn't represent our actual price because we discount so much. Those are just bad reasons. Those are symptoms stemming from a bad pricing process or go-to-market strategy or sales process. And so I would encourage those folks to really look upstream at where those problems are and solve those. Those are not reasons for not having your public pricing and packaging. I think one major dominant factor is, this is a place where, what is your competitive set doing? Because I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Gartner and Forrester, the other research analyst firms have, these days it's not a funnel, but they talk about the 9 loops or 20 touch points of B2B buyers and all the, I don't know what they're calling it these days, but especially with the advent of AI, we've been in a world of radical transparency from companies like G2 or Trust Radius, et cetera, review sites. Businesses are doing a lot of research on their own before they ever talk to you. And the question is, if all your other competitors have public pricing and packaging, you're likely not even making a short list. So if your argument there is like, oh, well, we'll wait till we have discovery and then, we'll wow them with the value. It's like, you're probably obviating even having a lot of those conversations, up front. But, so I would say, given that most companies are defaulting to public pricing and packaging, that's really good if you have standardized packaging. We talked about, good, better, best. That's a good way that people who are buyers can look at what you have to offer, understand what the delta is between those different tiers. Often goes hand in hand with high volume or PLG type go-to-market models.
PLG?
Product-led growth.
Okay.
Also high volume and velocity, depends on, where you might have heard that phrase before, but that's usually a lower ACV type product. Products that have, most likely either self-assisted or a low-touch sales-assisted motion versus, sales-led motion is an opposite version of that. But then, right, like you may have other distinctions that maybe you don't put full pricing and packaging on a website. You only put what you're packaging. Maybe you have your tiers and what the differences are between your tiers, but you reserve prices because sometimes companies, is where the complexity lies. So you want to make it easy for customers to buy and not use any of the bad excuses I used.
I'll see the examples of that on a lot of SaaS companies where they have, the standard plan, the pro plan that are all priced, and then the enterprise plan you call for pricing, right? Where it's going to be customized and complex. So there's two things that I wanted to go rabbit holes I wanted to take down. One is the discounting stuff. We'll get to that in a second. First, Steph, I want you to talk a little bit about pricing for services, because we're talking about products, but services is a different beast. Where first of all, it's probably impossible to publicly state what your prices are for services, because the answer is that always it depends. But what else? What other factors do you take into account, Steph, when you're talking about services?
Yeah, I think we need to remember that we've got an audience who has a wide variety of startups, right? We're not just talking to SaaS startup people. So, whether you have a product that is not a software product or whether you have services, Like, again, it sort of depends, but I think that there's a lot of value in scaling around productized services. And if you are not in the business of productized services, it gets pretty difficult to put pricing on a website, so to speak. And also, again, this comes back to knowing your audience. When I'm running a consulting company and we do $750,000 contracts, typically I'm not going to put a $750,000 contract on the website, because that's just not how my buyers buy, right? However, as a coach or a service provider to one-on-ones and that sort of thing, I often will put a package price on, for a productized service, because I don't want to waste time in sales calls with people who aren't in the right place. So again, and I don't want them to wait. I've been on the receiving end of that once, where I went through an entire sales call and only to discover that this person's pricing was like way out of my budget. And then it was embarrassing. And then it was a difficult conversation, right? So again, comes
That's
down
poor
back.
qualification on their side, right? They just didn't qualify you correctly.
Maybe, but I think that they were one of these people who was like, ooh, I surprised them at the end with the pricing. And then they're Parker and I
that never works out.
Parker and I were.
I love rules of thumb. So maybe you both can give me some rules of thumb here. So rules of thumb, like for generally speaking, for CPG products, the rule of thumb is take your cost of goods, multiply it times 4 or 5, and that's what your retail price should be. That's a general rule of thumb. Now you can go up and down depending on your positioning and volume and all of that kind of stuff. But I like having rules of thumb like that. Are there rules of thumb? First of all, is that a good rule of thumb? And then are there others that we could be following for like services or SaaS, or is it really just kind of the Wild West?
I really don't like that rule of thumb that you outlined. And let me tell you why.
It's a starting point though, right? It's a place to start.
So this is where, what that's called in the pricing world is cost-based pricing.
Right.
So this is where cost-based pricing sounds scientific, because especially finance types really like this approach, because I got my spreadsheet, I got my cost of goods sold, I got my target margin, I get an answer, right? Boom, out pops the number. But it's pseudoscientific, not scientific, because the margin that you input there came from your ass, basically. It just came from nowhere. No one said that should be the margin, right? We run into this in spades in SaaS, because I mean, if you look at your pure network storage compute, I mean, those are infinitesimal. So you're like, what do you put in there? 99.9 or 99.99% margin on your cost of goods sold, right? Nobody actually tells you what that number is. So could you go and maybe look at, like, I don't know, if you're selling, CPG, maybe go look at P&G's, public filings and see what their cost of goods sold is and their gross margin, and maybe infer from there if they break it out by business unit, potentially. But oftentimes in my world, that's just not even a starter. And so that really, it doesn't really provide you any solace to put a 5x markup. I know a lot of companies who do it, and one thing that does prevent you from doing is, in especially early stage, it prevents you from selling $20 bills for $10, because you're not going to be in business very long if you do that. And so at a minimum, it's like, if you've got nothing else to go on, if you have a good sense of what your cost of goods sold is, like, at least, like, all right, like, we know we're not going to be underwater from the get-go if we do this. There's way more other things I could say about better kind of approaches there, but at least that's not the worst approach if you're just getting started trying to set.
Well, I was you zigged on my zag there, but because I was looking for rules of thumb, and what I heard you say is there's no such thing as a rule of thumb when it comes to pricing. Did I hear that correctly, or is there something that you can basically you can say to founders, well, here's how you need to approach pricing that has more teeth to it than you first got to start with your positioning. And I know positioning matters, but we need some rules of thumb here.
No, this is the mistake everybody makes, right? Like they come in and they're like, oh, give me the pricing formula. I'm like, unless you're manufacturing and you're like selling B2B and you're selling, metal screws that are bought in, like I used to sell incontinence products to long-term care facilities. I mean, they will switch providers for a 1 cent difference per unit. Okay. Yes, there are pricing formulas there. But for what we're mostly talking about, your pricing is all psychology, right? It's all a sales exercise. So if I'm going to price my product, I'm going to price it based on who I want to attract and what they're used to buying. And that's much more valuable research than going and trying to back out of your cost of goods, because you might be in an industry where you've got high profit margin and you might be in an industry where it's low and you're picking up on volume. But you need to understand who you're trying to sell to and what they're expecting to pay, right? Because that's where you are going to find that sweet spot and where you're going to find the way to sell to people who are going to buy from you, because what they pay for your thing says something about them.
Yeah. Let me use an example. I completely agree, Stephanie. Let's use an example. Let's use the commodity of all commodities, water. Let's say you're on a road trip with your family. You stop at a gas station. You're a little thirsty. You're going to get a bottle of water. Your willingness to pay for that bottle of water, probably what, $1 to $3, something in that range. Now imagine you've been wandering in the Mojave for a week. What's your willingness to pay for that same bottle of water? I guess significantly higher. Now imagine you have gallons, maybe thousands of gallons of water busting out the pipes in your bathroom. That water actually has negative value to you. And you'd probably be willing to pay a reputable plumber a large amount of money to come and stop that water from continuing to flood your house. So it's not the bits or the atoms that you price. It's the context and the situation of your customers, which I think is what Stephanie was trying to say. Does that make sense?
What are you selling? You're not selling water. You're selling thirst quenching. You're selling, wellness. You're selling a fire being put out. So that is what you're pricing based on. What is somebody willing to pay for what? Even in bottled water, you have, it's all the same shit, right? But you have a bottle of water that's a discount brand and it's marketed for the person who just wants to doesn't value water. And then you've got this other end where it's all beautiful bottles and it's the same shit inside, but you're selling it at $1 more because you're targeting the person who, is really trying to improve their wellness and who knows, whatever, right? Water is such a great example because it's such a racket, right?
So let me double click on water again. So Dasani, bottled water is about 1 cent per ounce, which is still about 1,000 times more than most Americans can get clean tap water out of their faucet at price point, right? So Dasani is already 0.1 cent or 1 cent per ounce. Evian is 3 cents per ounce. So Evian is able to charge 3x the price on that. Now, Evian did something else, which I think is an amazing lesson here. Evian created this Evian facial spray, which is a aerosol moisturizer. The use case is women spray it on halfway through the day to keep their makeup looking fresh. They have that at a 1,500x markup on their bottled water. It's water and compressed air. The Evian is selling that at at a 1,500x markup to their own bottled water. Same atoms, different use case.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of the pricing, the psychology behind pricing, right? Pricing is so much not a formula unless you are in the adult incontinence business or you're selling metal screws or whatever, right? So when you are not in a position where it is cut and dried that way, and you've got very clear manufacturing numbers to work with and you've got a commoditized product, then you are instead having a conversation in terms of what am I actually selling, and what is somebody that I want to work with or sell to, what are they expecting to pay for that? Because what does it say about them? And when you get into selling services, this gets really, really like clear, right? Because the person that you're talking to could vary wildly. And if you want to sell high ticket, you better sell high ticket, as opposed to a discount. You'll always have the same sort of struggle bus people if you're selling low ticket.
Let's jump into that discount thing. So when should a founder resist the urge to discount? Or how do you, is discounting always a bad idea, or is it a leverage point that you can use to close deals? And are you conditioning your customers? Like, so all of things around discounting. Why don't you talk a little bit about discounting, Dan?
Yeah, it's a broad topic. So I think there's a couple of different approaches, and let me just tie it to maybe broad examples that everyone knows. So Tesla, for example, is no discounting. They do not allow discounting on any of their new vehicles. It's a company policy. I mean, CarMax, if you go buy a used car, CarMax, no hassle, no haggle, right? And they use that as a competitive differentiator from the rest of the market, because they know that the pain is so intense from a lot of consumers to even come buy a car. They're like, you come buy from us, it's not even on the table. The price is the price. And so that's seen as a competitive value add there. Now Apple has the same thing, right? Apple, iPhones, AirPods, MacBooks, whatever.
There's pricing.
There's a good story about Ron Johnson. He was the head of Apple Retail. Ron went over to become the CEO of JCPenney. He did not have a long run at JCPenney because he got rid of their high-low pricing. JCPenney had built a multi-decade, 50, 70-year business off of this high-low pricing strategy, very different than Walmart's everyday low prices, where people really got a lot of transactional utility out of, oh my God, this is normally $50, but I got it on sale at JCPenney for $25. And Ron Johnson came in and said, we didn't do this at Apple, we're not doing it here, and completely tanked their bottom line. So it really depends, going back to Stephanie's point, on what's the psychology of your buyers, what's the price point, what's the expectation of the category, right? Like if you guys try to sell you a Rolex in Times Square and he's like, I'll give this to you for $20. Well, all of a sudden you're gonna be like, this is a hell of a discount off a $20,000 watch. I'm beginning to doubt you're actually selling me the right thing here. And that would be warranted in that scenario, right? Hopefully you'd have other signals that knew you're getting too good of a deal to be true.
He will have a buyer, right? So who the people who are going to buy from him, there's still a buyer, but he's obviously using sales strategies that are going to attract that type of buyer. Right?
So, and then it depends upon, many other aspects. Where are you in your company maturity? There's you were asking for rules of thumb, right? There's many ways to get at willingness to pay. I'm not the first pricing person who said this, but I'll say it here just to give you a possible way to approach it, Anthony. Instead of going off cost of goods sold, you're selling something with cost of goods sold that's negligible, like in software. Well, you go to every sales conversation, double the price that you quoted in the last sales conversation until you get massive pushback and get laughed out of the room, right? So if I said $100 on Monday, I say $200 on Tuesday. Anyone who's played the grain of sand on a chessboard knows that, the exponential catches up with you really quick. And so, pretty soon you understand where the pressure is from your market, right? So that's one way to have a rule of thumb testing it. And then look, there's, I think, a big distinction, when you're at scale between what is discounting that we use to fit a particular customer use case and perceived value into our list price versus what is structural. And what do I mean by that? We can have discounting that serves very different purposes. I think the bad way to use discounting is just all based upon, hey, the sales guy thinks we need to drop the price in order to make this deal. Sometimes that's true. Probably more often it's not. But, if you don't have a price curve for volume in your list price. So, if I'm buying a CRM, it's $10 per user per month. If I don't have any curve, and so if I'm buying 1,000 seats, all 1,000 of those are at $10 per user per month. We should think about how we make that more of a structural discount than having sales guys needing to navigate that conversation every time they run into a big customer, right? And so there's different scenarios in which, we may try to shift that balance over time, but that all requires that you have a discounting policy and enforce it, then monitor it over time, which is a much broader conversation.
That's great. So I got one more quick question here before we jump into the speed round.
Let me just say something. Okay. So discounting in my world is something that we only use inside a container, right? So you will never say to a customer, hey, I'm giving you a discount on the work that we're going to do together. Instead, and this actually applies to the SaaS model too, but instead I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to co-invest in this first project together with you so that we can have some shared outcomes and shared responsibility. But the problem with discounting is the minute that you start discounting,
you set the floor.
You never recover from it, right?
Yep.
And the other problem is that when you have salespeople who are selling high ticket anything, and they start discounting, all you're getting are shitty customers that are problematic, right? So we have to put a discount inside of a container and have a reason for it, that it's like, hey, these are my founding members in this program, and you're gonna all, but the expectation is that this becomes more later. And this applies to I keep coming back because I actually have a customer right now where we're launching a SaaS product, and I'm super curious about the AppSumo model, where it's like, hey, for a limited time, you can go pick this up for a lifetime price of X as one of the sort of founding buyers. And that's okay, because I've got some great software applications that I bought off AppSumo or in that sort of lifetime model, and I love them. Like I got such a great deal, but what it did is created the volume that they needed, and it created that beta user group to be able to really figure out where the product needs to go from there, right? So I will say discounting needs a container and it needs messaging, unless you're in a discount business model, right? Which is also
used cars.
Yeah,
it's a legitimate business model, right? But be careful.
So last question, based kind of spinning off on that, Steph. How do you do that? How do you transition from early adopter pricing, who may be willing to pay either more or less, right, depending on the industry you're in, to more mainstream pricing? So how do you get out of that early adopter curve into the mainstream curve? How do you transition pricing, or do you really have to get this right out the gate?
Well, I think it's what you said last there, I think is probably a good frame for folks, because I think that's probably one of the number one fears that people have is we need to have everything figured out before we go into market. And I think is that true. You have the ability to learn and iterate your product in market. Your value and your price are intimately linked. So you should be able to change your pricing as your product value gets better and you learn more about your customers, which customers actually value it. So you can make that things we were talking about before about how your price scales with different customers, right? So you can align that better. And so we should always think about we should always be thinking through the launch, right? If you've ever taken golf lessons, they tell you swing through the ball. we need to price through the launch. And this is definitely an area where folks will reach out to us for help. They'd be like, we're launching in a month. We need help with our pricing. And I'm like, first of all, you've got a month. Launch with whatever you got, but by the time we get our hands in there and start doing anything, we're gonna be at that month point. So you're better off. But I think there's this built-in assumption that as soon as we're out the door, okay, well, we'll just all move on to the next thing. It's like, no, at that point, you're going to get some real market data. You're going to have real sales conversations. You're going to have real conversions on your website. You can still do things after that fact, right? Even if it's looking at okay, where are the placement of the next set of features into different tiers or packages, et cetera. So we definitely want to sort of lower that fear bar and that need to be perfect, out of the gate. It goes back to what I was talking about before. It's like before you launch, you have a hypothesis on your customer. You have a hypothesis on the value you give them. You have a hypothesis on your positioning, right? It's not like your pricing can be fixed, stacked on top of all those hypotheses.
That is absolutely true. I'll give one anecdote before we go to the speed round. I was selling on Amazon and accidentally uploaded the wrong price to one of my products. It was 3 times what I wanted to charge for it, and it turned out to be our best-selling product. So just an anecdote. Don't be scared of raising your pricing. All right, Dan, it is time for the speed round. What percentage of revenue?
So dramatic.
You're gonna rub it against stuff. All right. What percentage of revenue should come from your top pricing tier?
So if like we're talking about like a good, better, best model,
Yep.
Probably in the range of like 20 to 30% is a good rule of thumb.
And annual contracts or monthly flexibility for early stage SaaS?
Man, well, if you're one of these AI native companies, you're really trying to lock people into annual or multi-year at this point because you're worried that the foundation model providers are going to completely destroy any need for your product at all if you leave people monthly. But I think the best way to think about it is that the distinction between monthly and annual, it's risk sharing. So you're always charging, like if they have optionality to leave, they should pay a premium for that optionality, right? And then it's up, there's general rules of thumb. You usually get about a 17% discount for signing up for an annual. As you move into multi-year, that could be like 5 or 10% more.
A lot of SaaS companies are doing that now where they have a monthly or an annual and it's different. Okay, a prospect asks for 40% off. How do you negotiate? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to add to Stephanie's comment earlier is your company should hopefully have armed you as a salesperson with give gets. So these are, hey, you're asking 40%. I can give you 10% if you allow us to do a case study. I can give you another 5% if you allow us to use your company's logo in our logo garden. I can give you another 5% if you sign up for a 2-year contract instead of a 1-year contract. So you need to ask if they're asking for a raw discount, you just say, hey, this is what I can do, but this is what I need to return. And that is the more disciplined way to approach that.
It's not no, it's terms. Okay, so raise prices on existing customers, or do you give a loyalty discount, or do you just rip the Band-Aid off?
I like a loyalty discount. So if you're going to do a price increase, in this case, a loyalty discount would be to let customers know their price is going up, but hey, Anthony, we really value you as a customer. Therefore, for the next 6 months or 12 months, your price is not changing. At that point, it will revert. And then that allows you to get some goodwill, but then also make sure that everyone is paying a fair price for the value you deliver.
All right, last one. A real true competitor, somebody you win some and you lose some against, drops their prices 30%. Do you react or do you position around it?
It depends how well you know that competitor. Netflix was in this position when they were up against Blockbuster. Their team did a very thorough look at the state of the Blockbuster business, realized that Blockbuster, if they continued with that strategy, was going to go out of business, and decided not to move. So that is the type of insight that you should be looking at in your competitive intelligence team when deciding to look at a reactive price cut. There's many things you should be considering before you do a reactive price cut, but that's one way to approach it.
That's a great answer. All right. Well, that was great. So a couple deep dive resources, monetizing innovation and the strategy and tactics of pricing. So I think it was a great conversation today. Hey, Dan, where can our listeners learn more about you?
Happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. Go to tranquility.com is the main website. I also have a podcast of my own called SaaS Scaling Secrets. So folks can find that wherever podcasts are found.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Thank you all so much for listening. Please be sure to visit us on howtofounder.com, where you can connect with us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify channels. And remember, you are the pioneer of economic prosperity. We are so grateful to have you with us along the way. And we are so excited to see you on our next episode.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.